Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation, part 2 of our conversation with Elyse Ribbons, a startup founder, radio show host, actor, and writer in China. She is also the founder of the Cheeky Monkey Theater Group and host of the nationally syndicated news talk show Laowai Kandian, the success of which she goes into, kicking off this episode. We then talk about Peking Opera, something Elyse has a master's in fine arts in. We move on to discuss philanthropy in China, which was at the heart of one of her startup journeys as an entrepreneur, and we wrap up the conversation discussing the fine art of corporate world navigation, including the infamous eating and drinking culture involved. Enjoy.
It's really not about drinking and having a good time. It's about giving yourself the excuse to talk real. And once my boss realized that I could get the local officials to get into that comfortable space much more quickly. I mean, the first time it happened, I sent the local official to the hospital, like genuinely, like he was on IVs and was like alcohol poisoning. He'd never drunk with a foreign woman before, let alone an American, let alone one he'd seen on TV and blah, blah, blah. So he drank way too much. I mean, I did too, but I showed up with a full stomach because that's what you do when you go to these dinners. You eat a lot of protein. Like I would always have like nut bars, or I'd get a burger from McDonald's or something. You fill your stomach up before you go. That's the big secret.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Okay, Laowai Kandian. Tell us, what is Laowai Kandian? I know that you are proud of its success, and I think it was like the most listened to something. So get into all that. Where can audiences find it? What type of program is it? What have some of the highlights of your time doing Laowai Kandian been?
欢迎收听老外看点. So Laowai Kandian translates as International Perspectives. It's a really fun program where it's 3 different people from 3 different nationalities. We've got usually there's always a Chinese host, and then me, the American, and either a Russian woman named Anna, who is just a delight because she's very prickly at first. We always disagree, and then by the end we agree, and it's wonderful. Sometimes there's an Indian guy, sometimes a Korean woman. It's very fun because, I honestly think that we could solve world peace if they just let us take over the UN. Because you have a conversation with someone, like just a real conversation about a difficult topic. And then by the end of that conversation, you always can find that human element. And even if you're agreeing to disagree about little details, you agree on the important basics. It's one of those things that in politics in America right now, it's hard to get to. People are so distracted by those differentiators. They have a hard time remembering that we all, like, for instance, we all hate daylight savings time. I hate it because all of a sudden, all of my meetings, I had to rethink, oh God, where are they on the East Coast? Are they 12 hours now, or are they 13 still?
We all agree with you there.
Yeah, it's really, I hate daylight savings. But it's really good that this show was on air for as long as it was. I mean, it still is, but the listenership, I mean, it's fascinating. Even now, I will run into people, professionals who were avid fans of the show when they were in college. A lot of government officials are fans of the show. So I think that's one of the reasons I got my visa this time. Because I think, because no one said it. Everyone's like, no, you're not going to get your visa. Middle of COVID, you're not going to get your visa. But I got it. And I think it's because of that. I'm still often brought in because people liked that I was real and offered a different perspective, but that, we could always find a way to agree. So it wasn't like, just smack your face Because entertainment value in news radio is not common, but to have it be entertaining but still informative is nice. Yeah, we were the highest rated nationally syndicated news radio program in the country. So we had an average listenership of, I think, over 50 million people, which isn't huge in China, really, but for radio, it's actually not bad at all. We had one episode a day, but they were all pre-recorded.
That's a lot, though. How many would you record in a sitting?
3. Okay. So it wasn't too bad. It's still relatively recent news items. How long are the shows? Just like 22 minutes.
There's a Canadian mock show, like something. This hour is 22 minutes. It's a Canadian comedy show.
Oh, okay. I like Canadian comedy. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
man. One of my favorite Canadian shows ended, and I'm very sad. Cardinal.
Oh, Cardinal.
Have you seen it?
No.
Oh, I really liked it.
We got some good stuff. We punch above our weight, I think, in a lot of that kind of stuff.
Let's see that right there. Canadian entertainment and TV, right? The amount of funding that you have is so much less than what China has putting into its shows. And yet it produces content that is truly world-class,
It's true.
It really just requires consistent support, to provide a place for writers to think and actors to act and all that, to give them a life, because being an actor in China is people do it as a real job, but they don't have a life.
That's what I was at. Well, let's lean in on that a little bit, because it is not something that I think the average young Chinese person grows up being encouraged to follow as a career path.
Yeah, it's one of the things I always ask the actors I work with. So when did your parents finally get on board with you doing this?
Yeah.
And most of the time, honestly, a lot of actors have shared with me that they're like, look, this is the only thing I could do. I'm not smart enough to get into a normal college. So I got into the acting school because I'm attractive enough, or I could do this one little skill, or I have this talent. And so you've got I would say the majority of actors in the world are still intelligent people, because acting well means you have to really understand something, but there is a certain amount of, Hollywood mocks it where, there's the dumb, pretty people. And it's true. They're dumb and pretty, but if they look good on screen and they can act, they can pull that one character off. That's all they need to do. And that's fine. And I think the endless monotony of the unplanned snafus that happen on Chinese sets, sometimes it'd be better if you weren't intelligent, because when you're intelligent and you can see what the problem is and you can see how to solve it, but no one will listen to you or let you solve it, it's like you want to go bang your head on a wall. And I'm not the only one who's experienced that. In fact, at this TV series I'm on, there's a Chinese man from Dalian, actually, who he was thinking the same thing with me. He was like, why did they do this? They could have just done this and this and this. I'm like, exactly. And so,
let's talk about some Peking Opera, which goes really well with Peking duck.
It does,
yeah,
actually.
And you could tell our audience why we're even saying that. But you have Master of Fine Arts in Peking Opera. So tell us. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're going to have to explain what Peking Opera is, I think, to a lot of people. It's super famous, but maybe not everybody would know exactly what that entails and what that means. How does that help you understand Chinese culture? And
yeah, because honestly, I went into the program thinking it was just a way to study China, because it is the crystallization of so many Chinese values: aesthetic, artistic, moral. And I can actually segue this into business in a moment. So watch and be impressed, or listen and be impressed. Sorry. But yeah, no. So I started studying it just because I was fascinated with it as an art form, and I thought it'd be a good way to just get to know China better. And little did I know that it was going to be such an intense experience, and it sort of altered the way I view everything in China, because it really is a crystallization of Chinese history and culture. I would say it's not as applicable to modern China. Like it's a less of a mirror to modern China, as it is a mirror to traditional Chinese cultural values, with the exception that, during the Cultural Revolution, all of those performances were done by Peking Opera troupes, really. And they are very much a representation of those philosophies and whatnot in the era. Sorry, just thinking about those shows. They're very cool. That's what actually got me interested in China, is Hongsen Yangsijun, the Red Detachment of Women. It was ballerinas with swords and guns. I mean, it was friggin' awesome. These women were so cool. And that's an interesting thing I've always noted in Peking Opera is the female characters are often really badass. And, you know, growing up in the West, you sort of you have this really erroneous impression that Chinese women are docile and meek and, you know, weak. And you know, the whole small foot thing is sort of I think it was an attempt by the culture to try to make Chinese women weak because they are so powerful. I mean, just culturally, traditionally, they are these powerhouses. But, you know, yeah, it's a very cool thing. So I started studying Peking Opera thinking about that. I never intended to be a stage performer because honestly, like I'll sing a little bit for you, but it's not something that I am terribly good at in any real way. And also I'm not sure the art form has the potential. I mean, I would like for it to continue to evolve and move forward, but it's a little bit like if you've ever listened to vaudeville theater, that's sort of where Peking Opera stopped evolving, you know? And so musicals from the 1920s are really intolerable to a modern audience, right? And it's the same reasoning. Once you have microphones, once you have all these other modern technologies, you don't need those sounds to break through the crowd anymore. But you did back then, and it makes sense back then. But, you know, I would love to see it continue to evolve. And I hope now that I'm going to be working with that theater group that I'll be able to create some performances utilizing traditional Peking Opera techniques with some modern shows. But yeah, it's a very cool art form. It sounds a little bit like, you know, it's very high pitched because there were no microphones and the performances were held in tea houses. So the audience was always talking and having fun and eating, you know, maybe not Peking duck, but certainly eating lots of other foods. So the sounds had to break through that. But the really cool thing about it is that there were no directors. Each performer, each drawer, you know, each cast member was their own director, and every night was a new improvisation. And so people who are real fans of Peking Opera, you don't say you go to see a performance, you go to listen to a performance. And each night it could change a little bit. And there was one role, the Choujuar, the clown character. Even today, the only role that is allowed to sort of like openly mock the emperor. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And a lot of the arias or little raps that the clown character would sing out or say out were really profound and pretty cool. But I could go on about that all day. Instead, I will share this one observation I had when studying Sanguo Yanyi. That's the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of the famous Chinese books from, you know, thousands something years ago. And it's this, you know, during the three main kingdoms that were part of the Warring States period, you've got all of these famous generals, you know, like the Red Cliffs movie is sort of based on one of the famous battles. You've got Cao Cao, that general, and Zhuge Liang, and, you know, all of this art comes from this era because it's such a, you know, just lots and lots of stories, lots of drama. And something I noticed after studying that, especially, you know, analyzing the roles and the lines that people would say, is I would go from, you know, class straight to a board meeting for China Pacific Construction. And I'd be sitting around this meeting table in this fancy corporate office, everyone in Armani suits and ties. And I realized, like, oh, they're just performing a scene from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Like, it is exactly the same. This strategizing, the way that, you know, people approached the business world and connecting, communicating with each other, the way that you would speak to your superiors and everything. It was just exactly from that book. Exactly. Like, so many things about China have changed so dramatically in the past, you know, 100 years, but some things have stayed so profoundly the same. It is fascinating to me. The only real difference, I would say, is that certainly, at least in the companies I've been a part of, is that women are valued as humans, as people. And in a lot of the traditional art, like everywhere in the world, the women they didn't even have names, you know. In the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I think there's only 2 or 3 female characters, and only one of them has a name. And of course, she is a prostitute. I got a name for you. Chloe Zhao. Oh, Chloe Zhao. Yes. She is the Oscar award-winning director. She is amazing. I love her. I love her stuff. I love how she does everything. I'm a total fangirl, would love to work with her. Oh my God. Yes. But she's an example of, I think the intention was for her to go and study in America and then bring those skills back. But then instead she's just sort of thriving in America. But there's a lot of people in her cohort, because she's the daughter of, some very famous Chinese, film industry people. And so a lot of her cohort went to study in New York or LA, and then they came back. And those are the people bringing those sort of international visions and techniques and technology back. So I think that's why, sort of stepping back in the conversation a little bit, that's why the Chinese film and TV are just improving dramatically. I would say there's more and more series that are just beautifully filmed, beautifully written, beautifully performed. It used to be if there was one a year, I was grateful because I try to watch Chinese TV series to improve my Chinese. That's a really easy way to get your Chinese skills up, is just watch a whole drama, because there's only, subtitles in Chinese. And honestly, so much of language, as you pointed out earlier, Todd, is that, the emotion, the body language, the tone that people use. So your vocab doesn't actually need to be huge to enjoy a TV series. But it used to be so few, I would struggle to watch because it was so dumb. But there's more and more now that are just good.
I felt I was a bit of an anomaly in China I felt that I had a pretty good grasp of the culture. I felt like I had a good understanding of what the Chinese people felt, what they thought, what they were going through, because I wasn't necessarily adept at language, but I just picked up on so many other cues that I always kind of paid attention to and was more emotionally in tune. So although I couldn't speak really well, there was so much contextual information that I could gather. And so I think I just gave up trying to figure it out and wasting the resources on what was being said, and just started using my eyes and understanding and my heart to figure it out beyond what was actually being said. So
yeah, for sure. It's the same way that if you've got a fresh college grad who can read and write Chinese really well, but has never actually spent any time working and living in China, they'd be at the opposite end of your spectrum, which is that like they wouldn't get so much of those very refined, very subtle cues. And, I think you kind of need both. I'm not picking on you in particular. But if you spent the time and energy to get your Chinese up a little bit more, you would find a big leap or improvement in your connection to Chinese colleagues or Chinese businesses you wanted to work with.
100%. I felt that tipping point was out there. It like 18 months away of hard work, but it would have been there. And then I think I really would have I needed to get to that point, and I didn't.
Yeah, it just takes I don't even think it's 18 months. I think it's a lot less than that, but you have to focus on
18 months for me.
And I don't know. I think you're brighter than you might give yourself credit for, but it does require that intensity of time and energy. But if you're not planning on physically being in China and doing your career in China, it doesn't make as much sense to invest that time and energy. So I get that, it is one of those things that while it was appreciated overseas, I was living in America for about 3 years before I came back to China this past fall. And time and again, I'd be passed up. I'd make it to the second or third round in job interviews, and then I'd be passed up for an ethnic Chinese person because the assumption was that their Chinese would be better than mine, even though I know in at least 2 of these jobs that the Chinese looking person who got the job was born in America. Their Chinese was crap, they had zero Chinese business experience. Again, it's about how looks can affect your career perspectives in the long run. But so, yeah, it just felt like if I were planning on continuing my career in America, it would be less important for my Chinese to be this good. For it to be at your level would be totally fine because you get it. You get the cultural stuff. You get a lot of the subtleties in what's being said and not said. But you don't actually need to be working in Chinese, and everyone who's going to be working with you will be at least internationally minded, versus I'm trying to break into areas where these are Chinese businesses doing business with other Chinese businesses. It's not about me being a foreigner in that I'm bringing a foreign perspective or foreign resources. It's really just, I honestly think there's that benefit to my white face here that I'm allowed to ask those dumb questions that everyone wants to ask, but no one can dare to lose face over. And so I've had a lot of negotiations go very well because of that. And also, I'm famous. They've seen me on TV. I can out China most Chinese business people, because unless they've got a degree in Mandarin, a degree in Chinese, they've not been studying like the poetry that I have or the, you know what I mean? Like it's just,
I was going to say, you probably can out Mandarin a lot of Mandarin speaking Chinese.
Well, yeah. I mean, just because I always use this as an example. When you have a passion for something, you study it, you learn it, and you hold it much more dearly than people who just sort of passively have to accept it. They didn't choose to learn Chinese. They had to. I choose on a daily basis to continue learning Chinese. My
wife is Russian, and from a technical point, she would ask me things that I had never heard of. Like, what is a past present participle or something like, and I was I looked at her like she was speaking German. I had no idea what she was talking about at all. She literally had to, and I had to Google it. And I started looking at it. I'm like, wow, there's all this technical stuff about this language I think that I'm fluent in. And I clearly don't really know what I'm doing from that level, but from, studying it from a totally different viewpoint. Yeah, she knew so much more.
Just a cultural perspective. Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. She would have that mindset because she's actively learning. But there's this great book called Watching the English, and it was written by an English anthropologist. And everyone, anthropologists are always studying other cultures, but she actually sat back and decided to study her own. Like there's a whole chapter on the conversations around weather, for instance. And it's so funny and fantastic and wonderful because rarely do we as humans take a step back to like analytically think about our own cultures. And it's such a fascinating and wonderful thing to do. I highly recommend it.
Okay. Yeah. I want to tiptoe very lightly into the world of philanthropy in China, because I know that you have attempted to dabble or tiptoed or looked into and researched what you could do because you wanted to be a charitable person. You wanted to help the world around you. And so you spent some time looking around at ways that you could possibly do that. Can you describe the world of charity and philanthropy as it pertains to, because I think in the West, we have perceptions of it. We have activists, we have UNICEF, and we have, all kinds of, the Red Cross and things. I mean, do people in China give blood, whatever. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what you can without, putting yourself into too much hot water around it? Because it is, and we can be very honest, it's a sensitive subject, right? So I don't want to put you in any kind of position where you can't say anything. So, but whatever you can potentially give us, if anything, maybe just speak to that realm.
Well, I'll start with the facts. And the facts are that China has had several big, horrifying scandals around charity and charity funds. There was the infamous Maserati incident with, the China Red Cross.
Right.
There was with Guomei. There's after the Tianjin explosion, all of these fake charities were uncovered. I forget the organization that did it, but it was possibly UNICEF or some other organization. I forget the name of the organization. I apologize. But they did a survey of Chinese charities, and only like 0.001% of them passed like the basic transparency tests. And that's in part because some charities just don't have someone who's a money person, so they're not keeping good books. Maybe sometimes they have to make some payments to certain local officials just to be able to do the projects they want to do, and they don't want to put that on the books. Maybe they are just money laundering outfits for businesses and local officials, which is one of the reasons why Hong Kong stopped. They officially stopped dealing with any Chinese charities or philanthropies. Like they would not accept any bank accounts or do any work with them because so many of them were just money laundering outfits. And that's a problem because then, the entirety of Chinese, especially urban residents, are sort of disconnected from charity, from giving back and from connecting with their communities, which is really sad. China's been trying to make efforts to work on this, to clean this up a little bit. There's some decent efforts being made there. For instance, the American embassy I did an event with them many years ago, and they referred to Chinese nonprofits and NGOs as gongos, government organized non-governmental organizations, because all Chinese charities have to be registered with the government and they have to work hand in hand with the government. But this is actually a good thing, because without government support and without government buy-in, you can't actually do anything in China, like anything, right? And that's why, when people complain about Chinese businesses being too hand in hand with the government, it's like, well, yeah, in order to do anything, you have to have government relations, like really good government relations. I think it's hard for people to comprehend if they haven't worked in a country like China before. So, for instance, there's this group in Ningbo that is government organized. It's a whole street where it's a government funded, like nonprofit or charity accelerator. And so they get office space or storefront space. They get like someone from the government like holds their hand and helps them to register, especially with social enterprises, and helps them to connect to funding, to connect to customers and all of these things. I mean, even just having someone helping you navigate the very unclear, circuitous route around actual business registration or any sort of official registration, taxes, all of that. It's very cloudy. So having someone there to sort of wipe the clouds away, it's very good. And so Ningbo has produced actually a not small amount of local nonprofits and charities and social enterprises that are able to do good work sustainably within the government frame. And so those are all success stories I think will be good examples moving forward. Now, none of them deal with super sensitive topics. I mean, I can think of the ones off the top of my head have to do with providing like sustainable business and income to agricultural preservation areas. So there are these biodiversity areas in the Ningbo area in particular, where they don't want people to continue logging. They don't want them to continue to, essentially rape the land, but they have to provide some other form of sustenance for the people who live in those areas. And so there's nonprofits doing that work, which I think is really good and very cool. There's a social enterprise that was doing cultural preservation work. So there's this like famous like boar tooth dance, for instance. I wrote an article about it for New Voices, which is very cool dancing. I mean, it's like a Peking Opera thing, but with boar teeth in the mouth. It's weird. It's crazy. It's wonderful.
I think it'll come. I think, honestly, I think a lot of what's gone on in the West and all of those scandals and all those kind of things, probably I'd be a little freaked out too. I'd be like, probably, taking it pretty slow and taking a very measured approach to how as a culture do we want to really adopt charity and philanthropy in China and try to get it right. Yeah.
I mean, historically, I believe it was codified into law in several different dynasties, that during times of famine, like if X amount of produce was not produced, like if the grain count was under X amount, the local landlords could not tax the people, or they even had to give some of their stores back to the people. Because ultimately, if you have the people starving, everyone suffers, right? Like everyone. So I think it was codified into law because it's what's sustainable. And it's one of the reasons why I think so many governments try to help the poor or try to engage with philanthropy, because it is just what is sensible. Because if someone is starving, you cannot safely walk down the street with your sandwich in your hand, and that's sort of something you're seeing certainly right now in America is that disparate desperation, too many people are going hungry.
It's true. Okay. I want to talk lastly about, you were on the board of China Pacific Construction Group. I want to know, what was the organization? What was the board? What did you do? What did you learn about business in China from sitting on that board?
Well, I started in the company working in their international development office and eventually took over that position, and then became eventually the COO. in part because of this unique ability I had to connect directly with the boss. Because everyone else, all the other executives in the company were personal relatives, right? Because it's a Chinese company, and that's very common in East Asia. Most of the executives and any Japanese company are in some way related to the owner, the family. And same with Korean companies. It's very rare for it to be purely based on merit or talent. There's always some other thing involved. And in China specifically, because the legal framework around so many contracts and so many business areas is so shady or unclear, most privately owned companies are, you rely on this person being a family member. They're from your village, so they cannot screw you over because you can find them, their mama, And so this company it's a prime example of privately owned enterprises in China, and construction companies even more so, because, it was about getting the other partner, so often usually a local government, to buy in, and how to cooperate with them where they're able to get the right cash flow at the right time in order to be able to pay for the project, which is always an issue in China. And just being a part of those negotiations was fascinating. I'm sure many of the people you've spoken with have talked about alcohol culture in China and why you have to drink at the business table. And that was originally one of my high points, is that, I can drink, but also I can recite Tang Dynasty poetry, and I can talk about, elevated political issues, and they've seen me on the TV. So I was like the ace, the ace up the sleeve. And several times I was brought in to essentially drink the local official under the table so that they would actually tell us what we needed to do for them to be able to do the project. And I say this because, do you understand what I mean? I think it's hard for people who haven't done business in China to get that.
It's hard to describe, really, like the round table, the pack of smokes, the Mao Tai. I don't know how I don't know what to relate it to. There's no metaphor for that.
I know, because when I've tried to explain it, people are like, "Oh, so you're an alcoholic?" I'm like, "No, that's not the point. The
chain
point
smoking
is that
alcohol.
Get each other." Yeah. Well, it's like, so there's a liyi. There's an order to the amount of drinks that people have to have with you. So an example is, in many Chinese companies nowadays, you will have pretty young women who are sort of semi-management level, because they need to be able to be important enough to be able to drink. And so the thing is that if you are, the CEO of the company talking with the local official that you were trying to do a project with, that local official only has to really drink 1 to maybe 3 drinks with that CEO. But if it's a pretty woman, he has to drink at least 1 more with her, potentially up to 3. And then if it is a woman that he's seen on TV, that he, is an American and is all of these things, all of these different hats that I have, he has to drink more. It's harder for that local official to refuse. And he often didn't want to, you know what I mean? Because the whole point is that who has the face to force the other to drink, because you want to get the other side more drunk, because then you can negotiate better and blah, blah, blah. But by getting people to give in and play that game and then drink enough where they are allowed to officially lose face and not have it be a loss of face, then you can have the real negotiations. And oftentimes people weren't actually that drunk when they got to that point, but they had enough where they had the pretense that they were drunk, and they got to see each other in a more raw element. So trust is essential, because again, contracts don't really matter. The local government can always refuse to pay up in the end. And what do you do as the company? You walk away from the project and lose millions of dollars? No, so you got to be able to trust them and get to know them and know what they need. And so if you get them to the point where they can actually share that information, then you can do business. And that's sort of what the drinking is about. And that's why it seems like it's punitive. That's why it seems like, there's all these classification things involved with it. And that's why I found that every level further I could get without China eating them, with history, talking about history or talking about poetry or art or something, you just get another drink in them, and then they are willing to tell you that much more. And then
eventually you're speaking in tongues. Dynasties.
Yeah. Nice. Bad puns for the win. Yeah, no, it's not, because it's really not about drinking and having a good time. It's about giving yourself the excuse to talk real. And once my boss realized that I could get the local officials to get into that comfortable space much more quickly. I mean, the first time it happened, I sent the local official to the hospital, like genuinely, like he was on IVs and was like alcohol poisoning. He'd never drunk with a foreign woman before, let alone an American, let alone one he'd seen on TV and blah, blah, blah. So he drank way too much. I mean, I did too, but I showed up with a full stomach because that's what you do when you go to these dinners. You eat a lot of protein. Like I would always have like nut bars, or I'd get a burger from McDonald's or something. You fill your stomach up before you go. That's the big secret. But yeah. And so I thought this was the first time it happened. I thought I was going to be fired. Right. Because he's in the hospital. I'm like, oh crap, I've just ruined everything. And we're sitting in this meeting and I'm trying to drink this green tea, like just staring at the cup, wanting to die. And someone comes rushing in with, like literally like a clipboard from the hospital with hospital paper on it, with the stipulations for the contract written out by the local official from his hospital bed. Right. Because now he wants to work with us. And so we signed that deal that day. My boss had predicted it would take 8 meetings and I did it in 1. And once that happened, he brought me to all of the tough meetings. And so I did them all. Yeah, it was a very interesting experience. And so trying to explain that to people who've never done business in China, they don't get it.
No. And it's really hard, but that's why we have this podcast, is to try to help.
Yeah.
And I can't thank you enough for this amazing deep dive. We got so deep on so many different aspects of culture and everything. Elyse Ribbons, thank you so very, very much for coming on the show today. It was an absolute pleasure to be able to catch up with you again.
Yeah, it was good talking to you. Have a great day.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。